Board of Selectmen because it's not a money article. Mr. Greeley?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Traditionally, the Board of Selectmen called for the warrant call for town meeting at the time of town meeting. However, a few years back, we put it into a bylaw because we felt it was only fair for you to decide the timing of town meeting. What this recommendation is instead of waiting to start until 8 p.m., that town meetings start at 7 p.m. and conclude at 10 p.m. Lots of hands are up. I know lots of people are coming from all sorts of different parts of the world to get here to town meeting. But in my opinion, I think if a lot of us would notice, this is my opinion, one selectman speaking, this is not the position of the board, although the board supported 5-0 on behalf of this. Personally, I think after the break at around 9:30, if you'll look around, I think you will see about half of what are here before that break at 9:30. And I just personally, myself, would rather get home closer to 10 o'clock. I won't get to sleep any earlier. I lie there and think, why did you say that stupid on that warrant article, or why didn't you say that on that other warrant article? But personally, and the board supports, and we'd like to hear your opinion, we'd like to see town meetings start at 7 and conclude at 10 each evening.
Mr. Torsty?
The Finance Committee recommends no action on this article. It's a little bit of a selfish thing on our part, but the Finance Committee meets at 7:30 up in the Selectmen's hearing room before every town meeting. And we do that in case last-minute things come up. And for some reason, last-minute things come up all the time. And this gives us an opportunity if somebody poses another argument or something that we need to consider. For example, we did tonight vote to look at another article. We kept our position, but we voted at the request to look at an article. So we meet at 7:30. A lot of people can barely get here, especially at people who work in Boston. If we had to move this back to 7 or even 6:30, there is just no way I'm going to get a quorum. And I think that will be that'll just take that off the books, and I think will create problems not only for the Finance Committee but with town meeting on certain issues where we want to get something changed, which, like I said, happens quite a bit. We recommend no action on this article. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. O'Connor?
James O'Connor, Precinct 19, co-chair of the Town Meeting Procedures Committee. We deliberated on this article, and like the FinCom, we also proposed no action. One of the reasons that we discussed was the difficulty of several members. Quite a few of us come from work in Boston. We appreciate being with our families and would like to have time to do that. That's one issue. I think the second issue is, as we all know, there's always a lot of paper on our chairs. A lot of this information is given to us, and we're asked to deliberate on it as much as the moderator has pleaded that article substitute motions are before us before 24 hours or 48 hours before the subject is discussed. It behooves us, since we serve the people of Arlington, to know what we're trying to deliberate upon. I think we need time to do that. In addition to that, there's quite a few meetings that go on amongst members. They discuss articles, points of view, positions, and we all help each other to learn more about the articles. If we start at 7, well, we might as well all meet at McDonald's and see if we can get through quickly so we can get our hamburger and then get here. But I think what's really important is to have the time to serve the people. So we, as I said before, at the Town Meeting Procedures Committee, wholeheartedly request a vote of no action. Thank you.
Mr. Marr?
John Marr, Precinct 14. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I have a proposed amendment to the recommended vote of the Selectmen. Simply would ask that, and I'll hand this to you, strike out the word the time 7 o'clock and substitute, therefore, the time 7:30.
We have a second? Okay. That's the simple kind of amendment that we'll take on the day of. Gee whiz, can't even read that.
To speak to the original idea of the selectmen, I've had personal experience with, of course, being in the legal department for some time, and getting done at 11 o'clock. You're so keyed up. I'm talking not only the legal department, but other members, folks that sit up here, the selectmen, the town manager's office, certainly the selectman's office in particular. It's grueling. And to get home at 11 o'clock, you're still keyed up, as Mr. Greeley referred to, and the next day, it's very difficult to function effectively. This is a compromise. I'm almost always persuaded by what Mr. Tosti says, and I'm somewhat persuaded tonight. But this is a compromise. People will adjust. But I think it's the town meeting. This is your meeting. And getting here at 7:30, in my mind, is a compromise that would permit us to do our work more effectively. You would also have the option of adjourning, say, at 10:30 if you chose, but if you wanted to go later, you could do that as well, and perhaps have fewer town meeting sessions. So I strongly urge you to support the recommended vote of the Board of Selectmen, but with the compromise of 7:30 on the start time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Loretti? Yeah, John Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chris Loretti, Precinct 7. Mr. Moderator, I think everyone knows that politics is a matter of doing favors. And in that spirit, I'd like to, if you do a favor for the Board of Selectmen, they'll do a favor for you. And in that spirit, I'd like to do a favor for the chair of the Board of Selectmen related to this article. Now, I watched the warrant article hearing on this article, and I heard Mr. Greeley say that he'd like to have town meeting meet at 7 o'clock, and I heard him say he'd like to meet on Saturday, and I heard him say he'd like to put it to the vote of the town meeting. And I thought I'd show Mr. Greeley how to do that, and therefore I say, it is moved that if all of the business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Saturday, May 5th, 2012 at 7 p.m. Mr. Moderator, I make this motion in jest, but I make it because the article before us does not change the time of town meeting except once a year. And the bylaw only establishes the time of the very first session of town meeting. It is the fourth Monday of every April at 8 o'clock now. In the future, it will be at 7 o'clock should this article pass. The time of town meeting is set by that motion that I just read. We make that motion every time town meeting meets, as long as town meeting continues to meet. And passing this article doesn't change that. If people remember, it was just 1 or 2 years ago that indeed we voted on the time of town meeting, and we did it by using language that I just read to you, substituting 7 o'clock for 8 o'clock. It didn't pass. And I suggest to you it shouldn't pass again this year. If anyone has put forward a warrant article before the selectmen that is a bylaw change, they're very fond of saying, we don't need to change the bylaws, we can just do it. Well, this is a case where we don't need to change the bylaw unless people are really determined that the very first session of town meeting each year needs to change to an earlier time. So I would ask that town meeting reject and vote no action on the selectmen's article. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to ask Mr. Rice to interpret our bylaw where it says, frankly, Chris, I think it says the meeting will start at 8. I think that the meeting refers to all of our meetings, not just the initial meeting, but I'd ask Ms. Rice to opine on that point. Yeah, that's Section 1, Article 1, Title 1.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I certainly do not disagree with you, Mr. Moderator. And an additional point is we may not want to be having this debate every single day when the chair of the Board of Selectmen is making these motions. And finally, I'll just say, although you didn't call on me for this purpose, that I'm chagrined that the discussion we had earlier today about civility toward the elected and appointed officials is not being observed.
Wait.
Point of personal privilege related to the Board of Selectmen. Mr. Loretti just stated the art of politics apparently is to do favors and to give favors. Give me one example, sir.
No, we're not going to get into a debate,
Oh,
sir.
yes, we are,
No,
sir,
Mr.
if he's
Greeley.
going to make the claim. Number two, sir. Number two, he claimed the Board of Selectmen have made the statement, if it's a bylaw, we don't need to abide by it, we can just change it. That's not true, sir. Give me an example, Mr. Loretti.
Mr. Greeley, please.
How can you let him say it without proving it?
Sir, we can get into debates about every single selectman meeting.
Don't say it again without evidence, sir.
You have anything else, Chris?
No, Mr. Moderator, but I will clarify. What I said is when one brings a warrant article before the selectmen for a bylaw change, their standard response is, we don't need to change the bylaws. So I will say no more. Thank you.
That's a different position.
And as for the language of the bylaw, I would simply suggest that people should look at the back of their orange booklet. The current actually the new language is there, and it's quite clear that what that is stating is that town meeting begins the fourth Monday of each April at 8 o'clock. Actually, what it says is 7 o'clock because that's the changed language. And as I said 2 years ago, the reason we had this vote 2 years ago is the selectmen wanted to change the time of town meeting to 7 o'clock. It failed. It should fail again. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Greeley's point is taken, though, sir. Mr. Schlickman? Yeah, I got Ted.
Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. Red Sox are ahead 8-1. I would say that I see that there are many who would find hardship at a 7 o'clock start to town meeting because coming home from work, having a decent dinner and not going through the McDonald's drive-through and getting here in time to be deliberative can be a challenge for people who have jobs that extend to 5 or beyond. And I think that's an important point and a reason why 7 o'clock might be a drastic change. I think that the amendment to go to 7:30 is a reasonable compromise. I don't see myself as supporting a vote to go to 7, but I'm certainly amenable to do 7:30. I also am opposed to Mr. Loretti's amendment or motion to come back on Saturday. I think we all have better things to do. Thank you.
I don't think that was a real amendment. He didn't hand me anything. It was seconded. I know, but no, I got nothing up front. I don't get a piece of paper. It doesn't exist. Mr. Pelosi?
Ted Peluso from Precinct 6. This is near and dear to my heart. Now, the reason why is not because you start at 7 or 8 o'clock, and it kind of reminds me of being in church on Sunday. The church is mostly empty, and I hear the priest say, we got to make sure we all go to church. But the ones who are in church are there. It's the ones who aren't in church. Now, the way I see this amendment is very simple. Everybody takes an oath to go to all the meetings that they possibly could go to of town meeting. Okay? Very important. Now, unless I missed my accounting, and I don't think I have, one vote last week, we had 170 people in the room. 75 to 95. That means 80 people weren't here. Tonight I heard a vote. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a total 190 in that
Okay.
vote.
Tonight I heard a vote that added up to about 193, which wasn't too bad, but that's still seems to me, is about 55 people. Now, this is the legislature of this town. And you know what? I'm in favor of whatever time you have to start to get 252 people in the room. And you know what else? I don't care whether it's Saturday, Sunday, every day in the week. I go to bed 9 o'clock. I'm an old man. I go to sleep very early. But the point of it is, if I can stay awake till 11 o'clock, then people who have said they've taken an oath to do the best they can for some 45,000 residents in this town can stay awake till 1 o'clock in the morning if they have to. All I'm saying is, whatever you guys pick, 7, 7:30, the answer is a time that gets 250 people in a room. And not only that, if the concern is, as Mr. Greeley expressed, that about 9:30 we all get tired and go home to bed. I haven't gone home to bed yet, and I've been to, 12 meetings or so? Make sure they don't go home. We talked about it at the Town Government Reorganization Committee. We said, you can't just walk out. You can't say goodbye. How would you feel about that if you were talking to your representative? I don't know if we have any congressional representatives. He'd be pretty angry at him, wouldn't you? And we're supposed to be representatives. So again, you guys, this is the parishioners who are in the church. I'm trying to get these ideas across to the ones who aren't, okay? So personally, I don't care what time you start. I personally think the way town meeting works and the amount of power you seem to have, you probably should meet more often than once a year. But whatever it is, whatever it isn't, my advice is pick a date that'll get at a time that'll get people in this room and find a way to make sure they stay. Otherwise,
I think the fire chief won't like it if I lock the doors. Mr. McCrory?
Hugh McCrory, Precinct 20. One of the previous speakers said that some of the town meeting members would like to be home and have dinner and spend time with their family. Well, some of the town meeting members who volunteer their time have dependents. Speaking for myself, and purely myself, 8 o'clock, I can barely make it for 8 o'clock. I actually arrived early tonight to help hand out the town committee report, which is already done, so whoever did that, thank you. The town have the name and address of every member of this body. We do receive communications from the town. Why do we need a bylaw to change this? Why not take a survey, see what demand there is for this? Why waste time talking about this if it's already been defeated before? So I would suggest we don't vote this, but I would recommend whoever's responsible in town send out a survey. Maybe it's a job for Vision 2020 to see if we want to change it, see what the demand is. Personally, it's difficult. I think the issue is not the starting time. I think it's the finishing time. Again, that should be part of the survey. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. McCrory. Mr. Oster? Mr. Tully?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joe Tully, Precinct 14. Thank you to Mr. McCrory for ensuring that I didn't have to follow Mr. Peluso. I did, when I received the electronic copy of the Town Meeting Procedures Committee this afternoon, have the brainstorm to survey the body, and then it struck me in a moment of self-deprecation. I had a good chuckle on my own expense as I was driving down here tonight because I realized the results of the survey are going to be probably exactly the same as the result of the vote when we finally take the vote. However, I did have the minor epiphany to also request any respondents to the survey, if they were not town meeting members, to also indicate their preference as to the town meeting's beginning and ending time. And I also agree with Mr. McCrory that it's really the ending time, not so much the beginning time, although I won't split hairs on that. I took a quick look online tonight before I came down here, and I think the results are still completely unscientific and very minimal, so I don't know that they're necessarily going to be worthy of anything. I've only gotten a handful of responses, but it's interesting to note that of the few responses I got to, would you prefer to have, if you are not a town meeting member, would you prefer town meeting to start earlier, and would you prefer town meeting to end earlier? Both of those affirmative responses have a minor lead in the polls so far. So I think it's important to note that when, and by the way, I agree with almost everything that everybody has said up here, so that's a bit of an uncharacteristic position for me to take. But I think there's been a lot of, this is not one of these issues where he's right and she's wrong. I think there's been a lot of merit to what everyone has said so far. But before I got off on that tangent, I did actually have a thought. I think it's important that when we try to bring our little slice of democracy, when we try to promote it, that we try to be aware of the folks that are at home trying to watch town meeting. There's only 252 of us. There's probably an equal number, maybe a little bit more, of folks at home that have an interest in what we do here tonight. And although our opinion is the only one at the end of the day that's going to be of any consequence, I think their opinions are also worthy of consideration when we cast our votes tonight. I would also say, and I certainly don't want to make all the folks up at the table here to my right parade up here and give their opinions on the matter, but I imagine that it's quite a long working day for these folks on town meeting nights. They're working a regular work day like most of us, 9 to 5, 8 to 5, 5:30, whatever it is. Then they've got to sit around for another couple hours until 8 o'clock at night until the meeting starts. It might make it a little more palatable for those people if we are able to start the meeting earlier, not give them an opportunity to run into some of those issues that Mr. Greeley and Mr. Marr indicated tend to befall these folks when they go home at the end of the night. And finally, I would just suggest, as a matter of protocol, when we take these votes, this is always sort of a thorn in my side when I sit back here and I tell people how they should be voting. If you don't want to move the meeting time, I think it probably still behooves you to vote for Mr. Marr's amended